Thomas Friedman, the columnist in the New York Times, and written a number of books on this issue, says that people grow out of poverty when they create small businesses that employ their neighbors. Nothing else lasts. And then from those small businesses, last night, I met the husband of one of our neighbors, started a small startup in the neighborhood in Berkeley. She was telling me, yeah, he's so busy now, he has 100 people working for him. This is like 2 years ago. He's got 100 people. What is he doing? He developed software. I have no idea. He could be making Jell-O pudding. But, I mean, it's amazing. This guy was teaching, and then he figured, stop teaching, he wanted to start up. He had an idea, got 100 people working for him. That creates employment. It creates wealth and creates taxes and all kinds of other good things. So Michael Novak, one of my favorite theologians and historians who talks about wealth, he has a great book called Business as Calling. And that, very similar to a principal view that we've been talking about, says the basis for wealth in a culture necessitates political democracy, free enterprise, and moral cultural values that promote honesty, hard work, and so forth. Culture matters, in other words. So political democracy allows you to freely enter into the system where there's ownership, where you can create wealth. One of my favorite writers, Hernando de Soto, from Peru, wrote a book called The Other Path, El Otro Sendero. What he talks about is that half of the income generated in Peru is generated from the informal economy. What's the informal economy? People with push carts, people who run up to your car and sell you little tchotchkes, all this kind of thing, half the wealth. Why? They can't borrow money to establish a bigger business. Gives you an example in the book. Person with a storefront business in Lima tries to open a business, get a license. It takes 200 days and 47 bribes, and then he can open a business. The same business in Miami took 15 minutes and $12 for a business license. Which country is encouraging ownership? If you can't expand ownership, he then goes on to even talk about, if you've been in Latin America, there are almost always these, on government land, basically in Brazil they call them favelas, and there's tin houses and all this kind of stuff. The government owns that land. Hernando de Soto said, give them title. If you have title to something, you actually have collateral. You can go into a bank and borrow money and do things. But it's they don't want the people to enter into the political system, because then they become owners and change the laws and, taxes and so forth. Same thing, free enterprise. If you don't encourage, in the example I just gave, people to enter into the economic system, they remain poor. Of course, there'll always be a wealthy sector. If you've ever been in Latin America, people who've got money, you talk about wealthy houses. I mean, they really got it. And then cultural values matter. Culture matters. It's what's called social capital. Can people work together? Can they trust each other? Can they cooperate? Japan has almost no resources at all. How did they become first, second, third wealthiest country in the world? The people. The people work together well. When they had the terrible tsunami and various other earthquakes, there was nobody looting. Nobody broke the glass and ran away with television sets and things like that. Why? Because the people have been trained to work together. They have a sense of what's called social capital. They feel part of the group. And there are problems with that as well, but at least we know that social capital is important. You have to be able to work with others. If you can't work with other people, again, it's a violation of the fundamental principle. You're bound to gather to work with other people. That's the law of life. So the moral cultural values of a culture makes an enormous difference. If a culture that has mistrust, it's like in our country now, there's a lot of mistrust of people who are wealthy, people who you think doesn't care for you. Even I don't know the situation with the new health care law, if it was terribly wrong or whatever, but immediately there was some breakdown in the community, and it's all wrong, the president is no good, it's Congress, they're trying to rip us up. Wait a second. Let's try to work it out. For the last 100 years, presidents have been trying to get health insurance for lots of people. There's a problem if 30, unfortunately, I've had to be in a lot of emergency rooms for someone I love in the last year or two. And in those emergency rooms, they're packed. With who? Poor folk who don't have insurance. They can't go to a doctor to learn about preventive health measures and so forth. When they get sick, then they go to the emergency room. Emergency room has to treat you if you're not well. That's a problem. You get very quickly, you see somebody with a kid is bleeding, whatever. Yeah, there's triage, and they may see somebody who's in a dire emergency. But basically, these poor folks have been sitting there for hours trying to get in to see somebody. That's not right in a country that has the wealthiest country in the world. So culture matters, how we treat our people. What, again, from a principled point of view, is this acceptable? Are we drawing out the full value of our people, or only the full value of some people, and dismissing others as non-people? You know, all over the world, there are the non-people. We don't want to look at them. We don't want to go in their neighborhoods. We don't want to smell them. You know, this is how we look at things. Prejudice is such a sin where we cut ourselves off from all of humanity. And our economic relations, because we say, you know, okay, free enterprise, you know, I don't want to be bothered by anybody. I just want to make my money. I just want to, you know, hey, don't get near me now, you know, because you don't want interference with anybody. You know, if the government wants a tax to take away a few dollars, no. I'm only making my $3 million this year, and I'm not going to pay any more tax. Well, maybe it's right, but the problem is what we should at least talk about. There's an enormous problem of poverty, and we got to talk about it. And then if we can act, you know, the first thing is talking, and then acting, mobilizing, getting out there and doing something. So government has large-scale projects and bureaucracy that has not helped the poor. You know what happens in what I learned through the Economic Institute? When money is given to governments, very rarely we give foreign aid to a business. Money is given to a government. Money is given to the government, but they have a population. So they hire huge numbers of people, right? Because they got to keep the people happy. So they hire huge numbers of people, and then the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, want to help this country. And they say, well, look, we'll help you. We'll loan you a lot of money, but your bureaucracy, you've got enormous numbers of people who are doing nothing, and you've hired them. And then the country says, no, you're trying to tell us what to do as a country. Because if I get rid of these people, you know what happens? Revolution or something terrible. The only way to maintain being in power is you hire people for doing nothing. Because the principle is, I want to stay in power. Rather than, how can I generate great wealth from these people who are wealth creators and people who can be creative in our country, and not thinking in those terms, but how do we maintain our power? That's how all the dictators do it. They pay off large numbers of people, no matter what money they have, rather than encouraging setting up universities, whatever. United States may be a problem, but we have 3,800 colleges and universities in our country. Some countries have one. Now, who's trying to help their people? We got lots of problems, for sure, but 3,800 colleges and universities versus 5 or 10 in another country? America has 17 of the top 20 research universities in the world. So you can talk about, you know, we're having problems with our kids, and somehow they're getting into college, and somehow we still have 17 of the top 20 universities in the world. So all I'm trying to illustrate, with all of our problems, we are concerned with education. We've been concerned with education since the Puritans. You know what their philosophy of education was? Everybody's got to learn to read the Bible. So they all have to learn to read and write. That started out in 1620 with the Pilgrims. So that was the basis of universal free education. It often came through the church, even as late as 1820 in Boston and elsewhere, where the government was funding the church. But it was through the church that people learned to read and write. And then in the 1820s and 30s, you had the idea of free public education for everyone, separation of the church and the state. But that is where it came from. Paul Johnson, the famous historian, says, the free market with broad access to ownership draws out the God-given creativity of the individual and promotes the greatest production of wealth. Free market, broad access to ownership. Let people participate in the economic system. Let them have ownership and create wealth. That will develop more. If you close the system, in Latin America, it's often said that 40 families control the wealth of a country. Well, it's probably not literally true, but close. You know, wealth is concentrated in a small group of people. if the other people had the opportunity to create wealth, yes, they probably would be taxed and they wouldn't have as much power, they wouldn't have to control, but it would be a richer, healthier, moral culture rather than revolutions every 3 years. And obviously, I've been in North Korea. I can proud to say I've been in North Korea. The future is here and it doesn't work. I mean, it's so crazy. They have a philosophy called Chuche. Chuche is like, we'll do it ourselves. We don't, they're doing it ourselves. 3 million people starve every year. You ever been in North Korea and South Korea? North Korea, if 3 people are standing on the street corner, there's a problem. South Korea, you can hardly walk on the corners because people are just all over the place. You know, I've been there now, going there 30 years, from a small backward country, all of a sudden they're like the 9th largest economy in the world or something. What's going on? Give them freedom. Give them property. You know, these little mom and pop stores, all of a sudden they're sending their kids to Harvard or the University of Tokyo or, you know, Seoul University, whatever. And the kids are coming out, you know, mom and pop are just sort of selling these little candy bars and stuff, and the kid comes out as a computer technician and computer engineer from Seoul National University and starts, you know, Samsung. Now you even hear Americans talk about Samsung, you know, as like the number one in the eyes of many people. How did that happen? Well, they're going crazy for education. They're nuts for education. Educators there, like in Finland, are seen as very, very high-level people. And to be an educator is very significant. And of course, their kids, you know, from 6 in the morning, you go on a train in Seoul. A kid is there going to school, study early with some tutors. Then after school at 3, they're on the train going to what I guess Japan's called a junko, and in Korea it's called a haksa. Isn't that what it is? Hagwon. And till midnight, 10, 11 at night. At midnight, these little kids, middle school, are coming home. Yeah, it's true. You wonder why our country does it. Well, you can go crazy. Now, there are a lot of problems with this as well. But if you're serious about education, serious about building your economy, give people the options of being owners and educate them to be owners and let them go. And that's what happened. North Korea is empty. There's nothing there. The main street is empty. You know, I walked around Pyongyang and they have neon signs that look like they're restaurants. They're no restaurants. It's just like neon signs. Potemkin Village. You know, the reality is that, you know, if they don't encourage their people to work and to own things, and they just depend on the government. You know, they all wear this little pin. It used to be when I was there, Kim Il-sung, and I tried to get the pin. Couldn't get it for love of money. It seems like if you don't have that pin, you don't get your food allotment or whatever. You know, and all over the town, you have these big pictures of Kim Il-sung, you know. And when Kim Jong-il died, you see people crying and throwing themselves on the ground and all that. Well, they got to do it because they're being filmed, and if they don't throw themselves on the ground and cry, you don't get your food or whatever. I mean, it's millions of people. You know, talk about gulags. A lot of books have come out now about the gulags in North Korea. Why? Because control like that by one family. 3 generations now controlling their family. So the failure of communist systems, like the failure of capitalist systems, involves 1, profit maximization. Make profit at all expense. This book I just read, literally, whatever it takes. It rips apart their families, community. We want to make profit. And also, you know, capitalism does involve creative destruction. The idea of creative destruction, you know, to make the new thing, and the old thing dies away. So we all think, well, that's a terrible thing. Well, should we all drive around with a horse and buggy? The guys who had stables, Mr. Silverman had the stable across the street from me in Brooklyn. Mr. Silverman, you know, had to go, and the cars came. And, you know, that's what capitalism is about. However, we can provide a better safety net. We can provide better transitions from one cultural aspect to another. You can't eliminate the creative destruction of capitalism. We always want to make it new, even in art. The motto of Ezra Pound and other poets was, make it new, the American vernacular. Destruction of the environment. In capitalism, right now, it's horrible to read about what's happening in China. They may be poisoning their food system because there's so much pollution. They want to get ahead fast, but it's like nonstop parking. It's not a parking jam that goes forever. It's almost like it has stopped. And the pollution, everybody's got to have a car because we had it, and they want to catch up with us. We had our problems. but that's a big problem. So Robert Bellah at Etzioni, the social philosopher at Etzioni, talk about the death of the common good and the emphasis on, again, the personal good as opposed to the common good. And that's affected us in all of our systems. Capitalist systems can work well if you have people of character and virtue, motivated by core values, by principles. If business is a calling, people feel called. Business, again, is very creative. I mean, if you ever look and talk to how business people created things, it's amazing. It's such a creative deal to worry about income and expense and personnel. And I mean, it's endless. Working effectively and creating a business is the high order of art or a high order of creativity. It's not a simple thing. So also the importance of capital. Not only money, which is very important, has to get in the hands of lots of people, but again, social capital. Are we teaching these people, these kids who are texting all day long, are we teaching them cooperation, the ability to work with others? That's necessary. It's called social capital. Yesterday, the person talking about brain development with young people, they've got to realize how to develop that aspect of the brain that enables them to work well with other children. If they don't do that, it doesn't get better. It just lies dormant and atrophies. So we've got to stretch those muscles, just like, you got to stretch the muscles to just remain in some sort of good shape. The muscles of the brain need to be stimulated in that way too. So economic capital, social capital, and spiritual capital, the degree to which we are in touch with the best and deepest part of ourselves so that we can reach the best and the deepest part of another human being and draw out that value. Muhammad Yunus, one of my heroes years ago, in this book on principal economics, I said he should be nominated for the Nobel Prize, which he eventually got. It wasn't because of my nomination, but anyway. I could nominate lots of people. Brilliant idea. Muhammad Yunus was a professor of economics in Bangladesh. Someone came to him to borrow $50 for some little craft enterprise. Loaned him the $50, and he realized, there's poverty all over Bangladesh. Why don't we set up village banking? So that people coming to a bank, no bank is going to loan money to a poor woman in Bangladesh. She has no collateral. But suppose we set up like a support group in a village, have the bankers go to the village, set up a village banking system so that the woman who wants a loan will be part of a loan group that will support them not only morally but practically. Loan $50, loan $100. You know what that means for somebody in Bangladesh? They can produce a craft that can be sold in the Mennonite stores or Global Exchange in Berkeley or elsewhere. I talked to the woman in Global Exchange the other day. She just came back from Guatemala. It was a replication of what Yunus was doing. She gives, let's say they were making these dolls. And she asked them, okay, how much are these dolls worth? $10. She gives them $5 right off the bat. Then, as soon as the doll is sold, they get the other $5, and yet Global Exchange makes a few dollars. So what's happened is that now millions of people own what's called the Grameen Bank. They own the bank, and they make these loans, and the return of the loans is like 90, 98%, 97%, 99%, an enormous percentage of return on the loans. It's now being done. A woman graduated from Stanford, started this a similar kind of organization, which has been replicated in many ways, where now you can online go to this site. The moment I forgot the name of it. It's the first thing. Kiva. She's from UC Davis. Okay, we won't take her out of Stanford, put her in UC Davis. So this organization, Kiva, allows you to identify possible people in the developing world on particular projects so that you can choose to loan money to a particular project sitting on your computer here. Then the money that's returned will come back to you, and you can then send it to somebody else. So you can choose what project you want to serve. So this is the best thing that I've ever seen in terms of helping the poorest of the poor. Micro loans, micro enterprises. A fellow who's here a little earlier, his mother gave a sewing machine to women in Guatemala. they made dolls that are sold in these various venues like the Mennonites and stores. And it's helped. What's the result? These women are able to educate their children. They're able to provide better health care for the children. They're able to have a sense of their own dignity because women were never involved with this banking and borrowing. So again, there are many, many benefits that are spin-offs of this kind of thing, helping the poorest of the poor. Eunice has written a new book since then called Evolving Social Business, that the same principles that have allowed businessmen to be successful, they can now target social issues and still be profitable. That, it's a real big challenge. And I told you about Hernando de Soto in Peru. He talks about, giving ownership of land, ownership in terms of businesses, giving them business licenses so they can then collect monies to build some sort of economic foundation. Also, you may have seen if you shop at Whole Foods or other places, do you ever notice the fair trade label on many of these places, many of the bananas and other kind of things? Fair trade means that a food market in the United States will only purchase from, let's say, a cooperative in Costa Rica that pays fairly, that is concerned about the environment, and has X number of conditions. So this ensures that they're not being exploited, but there are people there who are monitoring that this is a fair trade organization. So by buying fair trade stuff, you're actually, again, helping people in the developing world. And it's an amazing, in Europe, this is a very big thing. In the United States, I've only seen it in Whole Food stores and some gift shops. But it gives you a sense of, yes, I'm supporting something in another country that will benefit me in the long run and will benefit them now. So again, economics has much, much value. Partnerships of NGOs with business and government is happening more and more. A book came out called The Revolution That's Going On in Cities. The title I don't remember exactly. But what's happening, because federal government seems to be stuck, many creative things are now happening. The partnerships of businesses, local government, and nonprofit organizations, creating activities and services for poor people and others. So again, if something is stuck here, grassroots is always the best if you can work it on a grassroots level. And that's now happening with that collaboration and partnership. And that seems to be the best that needs to happen at all levels, collaborating with others, whether they're religious groups, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, or with government also. So in essence, man is at the heart of the marketplace, and God is at the heart of man. Recognizing that opens up tremendous possibilities. Doesn't solve all of our problems, but certainly liberates energy, creativity, value, love. And that's what I think we have to promote in collaboration with other schools, with other religious organizations. We can't do it by ourselves. We need to work with others to accomplish major activities, major challenges. That's our hope. That's the principal viewpoint at various areas of culture. Thank you very much.